Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Obama and Netanyahu face off, but do they really disagree that much? Artists offer a new take on the Jewish canon, and Black-Jewish reconciliation 20 years after Crown Heights. It's the Jewish news that's changing your world, right now on this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. As you undoubtedly know by now, President Barack Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have become fierce opponents over the past week, threatening the alliance between the United States and the Jewish state. Or have they? Here's a sampling of the things they had to say.
While we may at times disagree, as friends sometimes will.
We have an enduring bond of friendship between our two countries.
We stand together to advance peace. We stand together to fight terrorism.
Obviously, there are some differences between us in the precise formulations and language, and that's going to happen between friends. The frequency of these meetings is an indication of the extraordinary bond between our two countries, as is the opportunity for the Prime Minister to address Congress during his visit here. I know that's an honor that's reserved for those who have always shown themselves to be a great friend of the United States.
Congratulations, America. Congratulations, Mr. President. You got bin Laden.
The bonds between the United States and Israel are unbreakable, and the commitment of the United States to the security of Israel is ironclad.
This doesn't seem like two men in a battle. In fact, while jabs are being thrown from the right and the left to attack Obama and Netanyahu, respectively, there's a lot less conflict here than pundits would like you to believe. Let's start with the left-wing criticism of Netanyahu, which has suggested that Netanyahu has taken a negative tone in his discussion and statements to the president. Most prominently, the suggestion has been made that Netanyahu, in his meetings with Obama in the Oval Office, did not express solidarity with Obama. Here's the New York Jewish Week's Gary Rosenblatt's take. Rosenblatt writes, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had an excellent response to President Obama's major speech on the Arab world and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but it came 2 days too late, and the net result is another Hasbara disaster for Jerusalem. Rosenblatt continued, Netanyahu said on Saturday that Obama had, quote, shown his commitment to Israel's security both in word and deed in Thursday's presidential speech, adding, quote, we are working with the administration to achieve common goals. Rosenblatt then asked, why couldn't he have said that on Thursday instead of immediately rejecting Obama's views on moving peace talks forward? The fact is that not only could Netanyahu have said that in meeting with Obama, he actually did say that, almost word for word.
We share your hope and your vision for the spread of democracy in the Middle East. I appreciate the fact that you reaffirmed once again now and in our conversation and in actual deed the commitment to Israel's security. We value your efforts to advance the peace process. This is something that we want to have accomplished.
Other critics of Netanyahu have complained that he provoked Obama by requesting to speak before a joint session of the U.S. Congress. If so, then Netanyahu has been provoking in that way for nearly 15 years, as Netanyahu did the same thing in 1996. Other Israeli prime ministers to address a joint session of Congress in the past include Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin, two of the Israeli left's most important figures. The criticism of Netanyahu from the left, as we can see, has ignored the overall content and context of Netanyahu's remarks, focusing too much on small points without seeing the larger picture. Now, what about the right-wing criticism of Obama? Much of it has centered around his statement about what Israel's border should be after a peace process.
We believe the borders of Israel and Palestine should be based on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed swaps, so that secure and recognized borders are established for both states.
What's wrong with Obama's statement there about 1967 lines? Here's how Jerusalem Post columnist Shmuel Rosner put it in an article on Slate. And now, for the first time, a president is saying that this line would be the starting point for peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians when they get to talking about the future border of a future Palestinian state. It's probably true to say that no U.S. president has made that statement in public, so the right-wing argument here is technically true. But would you believe that an Israeli prime minister has released a statement with nearly identical language? And what if that prime minister were none other than the right-wing Netanyahu in a statement from 6 months ago? After meeting with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in November, Netanyahu and Clinton issued a joint statement. The statement carries a long quote from Clinton about the broad terms of a peace deal, including the desire for, quote, an outcome which ends the conflict and reconciles the Palestinian goal of an independent and viable state based on the 1967 lines with agreed swaps. At the conclusion of Clinton's quote, the joint statement from Netanyahu and Clinton continues, stating, those requirements will be fully taken into account in any future peace agreement. As we can see, Obama's statement about 1967 borders as a basis of negotiations not only wasn't a new left-wing tactic, but was part of a long-standing position to which Netanyahu had already signed on. In fact, the surprising parts of Obama's statements this past week have not been new shifts leftward, but rather some ways in which Obama has aligned himself with Israel's right wing. In Obama's Middle East speech, he declared that an initial peace deal could be made without resolving two major issues.
Two wrenching and emotional issues will remain: the future of Jerusalem and the fate of Palestinian refugees.
The idea of a deal that leaves those two issues for later comes from Israel's far right wing, not its left. Criticism from the right on the issue is therefore out of place. And here's another idea that Obama borrowed from Israel's right wing.
Full and phased withdrawal of Israeli military forces should be coordinated with the assumption of Palestinian security responsibility in a sovereign, non-militarized state.
Who on Israel's right has been calling for a non-militarized state? None other than Netanyahu himself in his famous 2009 speech outlining a two-state solution. As you might remember, Netanyahu was heavily criticized by the left for adopting this position of a non-militarized Palestinian state. Which means we've now come full circle in the debate over disagreement between Netanyahu and Obama. While those outside this pairing tussle on the left and right, they seem to ignore even very recent history in trying to understand what's going on. And those on the left and right also seem to try to make far more of any possible disagreements between the two than actually exists. Reminiscent of low-level gangsters puffing up their chests and offering disparaging comments at the smallest perceived slight of their leaders, operatives and columnists seem to want conflict, while the real leaders in charge are telling them to just calm down. The real story about Obama and Netanyahu isn't about these perceived differences in slight shifts left or right in detailed analyses of potential peace deals. The real story is about how they're actually the same, how the narcissism of small differences isn't keeping them from marching down the same path. All these details about peace agreements are quite minor relative to the larger issues regarding the peace process. That includes the unity deal that has brought Hamas into the overall Palestinian government, which both Obama and Netanyahu say will keep peace talks from commencing until Hamas can denounce terror and recognize Israel's right to exist. Both Obama and Netanyahu are also committed to keeping the Palestinians from unilaterally gaining recognition as a state at the United Nations. Both want to see the return of captured Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. Obama and Netanyahu are seeking and saying essentially the same things about the peace process. And what's more, they both agree that there are more pressing issues to deal with in the region. The two leaders expressed strong concern about Iran's nuclear development and instability in the region, including that in Syria. No matter what pundits on the left and right are focused on, Obama and Netanyahu see a broader picture that they feel demands more attention, and they seem to see it through essentially similar perspectives. Moving on, a very different story of black-Jewish alliances was taking place at the 92nd Street Y last week. Christian Needon has that story as part of TJC's partnership with the 92Y's Resource Center for Diversity.
20 years ago, the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn endured 3 days of riots that exposed unresolved tension and hatreds between the majority black and minority Jewish populations of the neighborhood. Last week, the 92Y Resource Center for Jewish Diversity hosted a panel of prominent black and Jewish community members to discuss where relations stand today. Two high-profile panelists were Russell Simmons and Rabbi Mark Schneier, who both cited interracial dialogue and advocacy as a key element to healing the wounds of Crown Heights, a lesson that Schneier said was inspired by the civil rights movement.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. understood that a people who fight for their own rights are only as honorable as when they fight for the rights of all people. It's not about blacks fighting for blacks or Jews fighting for Jews. It's about African Americans combating anti-Semitism, and it's about Jews combating anti-black discrimination.
Simmons, who chairs the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding, where Schneier is president, said that New York City's blacks and Jews have grown closer socially over the past 2 decades.
We do have a period of great cooperation, just as we had a great period of cooperation during the early civil rights movement. We vote together. We have a lot of the same views on many, many things in this country, and our political and social ideals are connected in more ways than probably any other two groups in this country.
To hear what other members of the panel had to say, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. An interesting arts venture tries to build community through Jewish identity. Rebecca Honig-Freeman reports.
Love was in the air at the 14th Street Y in Manhattan this past weekend for Eros, an arts festival produced by the Fellows of LABA, the National Laboratory for New Jewish Culture at the Y.
It's basically an artist Beit Midrash or study group. The artists study a theme of text for the year, and at the end of the year we do a festival showing works inspired by their study.
This year's text was the biblical love poem, Song of Songs, which LABA Fellows studied together over the course of the year.
Once a month we get together and we have a sort of a study session. We also have these salons where we're to be inspired by the text and then come in and, in my case, I do a character, I tell a story from my life. Other people do their own art form, which could be sculpture or visual art or dance.
And these workshopped pieces eventually turned into the music, dance, visual art, and other media that were showcased at the Eros Festival.
It was a great opportunity for all our different members of our community to think about love in new ways, in different ways, and I think that that's probably a good thing for the world.
For more on the Eros Festival and the LABA Fellowship, watch the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable: IO Optimum Cable Channel 291, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, RCN Channel 268, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and Cox Cable Channel 1. For more information, visit tjctv.com.